During his research, Ralph Rene picked up on a 1959 article by James Van Allen entitled Radiation Belts Around the Earth. One of the original statements he had made around the time he extensively measured the intensity of the belts was,
"Unless some practical way can be found to shield space travelers against the effects of radiation, manned space rockets can best take off through the radiation-free zone over the poles."
Of course, this is not how NASA claims Apollo got to the moon. Instead, they claim that the S-4B third stage accelerated from 18,000 miles per hour to 24,000 miles per hour, which flung them out of Earth orbit, and subsequently right into the Van Allen belts. And because they were launched from Florida, it would not have been possible for Apollo to reach the polar region in such a short amount of time and with what little fuel they had. With Van Allen's statement in mind, I thought about seeing how many propagandists would confirm what I already knew. But because these individuals are known to alter the laws of physics when it suits them, I didn't dare ask them up front. Instead, I waited until the standard argument of why no one saw Apollo from the ground was brought up. Playing the village idiot, I invented a story about an Apollo capsule orbiting around the North Pole in a tight circular formation to avoid detection. I knew from the start that such an orbit was impossible. If you want to orbit a planet, you must orbit the whole planet, not a small portion of it. I just wanted to see how many propagandists would buy the act and confirm what I already knew, that it was impossible for Apollo to do as Van Allen suggested. Guess who confirmed it for me? Grand Luna, the guy who accused me of doubting the Mercury missions over a picture for a Thomas the Tank Engine video. As penned by Grand Luna on July 11th, 2006, "The orbit you depict is a highly improbable one. The CSM would have to have been launched above the Arctic Circle to get an orbit like that. Launched from Florida, it would need to alter its orbit bit by bit, a process that can take days to get an orbit like that." So much for Apollo being able to avoid the radiation by flying through the polar region. Unfortunately, the propagandists will not let it go, even after it has been established that I invented this nonsense to trigger a slip-up. They cling to it as ammunition against me as though it were a confession to murder. None of them will own up to the fact that my belief in this preposterous polar orbit hearsay is purely a figment of their imaginations. When I invented this story, I secretly had my newspaper findings up my sleeve. But it seems the propagandists can't read between the lines. As I had frequently hinted, I often wonder how the propagandists would react if any such sightings were made. I soon got my answer. We already know that 7 hours before Apollo 11's splashdown, residents in Western Australia saw a bright object moving across the sky for about 4 minutes. In less than a day after I released my video on this subject, the propagandists jumped on it, insisting that it was actually Proton 4 that re-entered the atmosphere. It seems astronautics.org does list the day this satellite re-entered. It was listed under decay date, not re-entry, which was the term I was looking for. But nonetheless, neither Encyclopedia Astronautica or the propagandists explained how Proton 4 was able to go for a month unidentified. But most astonishingly, subsequent to the release of my film, propagandists were quick to argue that an orbiting spacecraft would not have caused the same reactions as the July 24th sightings. On December 3rd, 2007, the very day after I released my video, Gavin Stone had this to say. "Here's a quick news flash.
Orbiting objects don't cause bright lights in the sky and people to look up and take notice. They simply look like a star progressing slowly across the sky, barely noticeable.
The very next day, David Greer was also jumping on this, stating that an orbiting spacecraft would not have caused the reactions of Harry Smith and Michael Dubois.
If it was just a satellite in orbit as opposed to re-entering in the atmosphere, it wouldn't elicit such responses as, "The object could have been a satellite re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. The most remarkable thing he had ever seen in the sky. A little glow about the size of a ping-pong ball. It gave me a big fright, and as soon as I got to the Old Coast Road, I stopped at the first house I saw and nearly banged down the door. Do you believe in flying saucers?"
Greer went on to compare orbiting spacecrafts with re-entering spacecrafts using analogies such as cats and elephants. That same day, Stone said,
"The article describes it as entering the atmosphere, and the people described it as something out of the ordinary, unusual, bright, a UFO, which signifies to me something entering the atmosphere. Why would an orbiting Apollo 11 be classed as unusual and bright when all it really would have been was a semi-bright star slowly traversing the heavens? Hardly noticeable."
If an Apollo spacecraft in Earth orbit would have been hardly noticeable from the ground, why did the propagandists make its visibility as their biggest argument against the evidence that Apollo was in Earth orbit the whole time? As ApolloHoax.net member Geoff told me at the Loose Change Forum around the time I invented this polar orbit crap,
"It wouldn't take an astronomer to notice it. As with the shuttle, you can notice it even if you're not looking out for it."
And as Robert Brainig states on his website,
"Orbiting spacecraft and satellites are easily visible to the naked eye. The Apollo spacecraft were large vehicles, thus bright and easy to see. Had the Apollos not left orbit, they would have been observed by many people worldwide, yet there were no such sightings."
And as S. Vector said when he stalked me onto Phil Jahan's forum and tried to hold my supposed polar orbit theory against me,
"The regulars there reminded him that the capsule would be the brightest object in the night sky, and very noticeable."
And who could forget Jay Windley's famous quote we heard earlier?
"It would have been the brightest object in the sky, next to the Moon and Venus. And it would have been moving so fast that it would have transited the night sky in about 3 minutes. Bright, fast-moving objects in the sky attract attention."
Windley then goes on to say, Mr. Sabrell argue that billions of people over 6 missions lasting more than a week each failed to see it. All these statements were made before December 2nd, 2007, the day I brought my film out, and each of these individuals insisted that the capsule would have been easily seen or very noticeable. And yet, Greer and Stone now assure us that it would have been hardly noticeable. It seems Apollo would either have been very noticeable at night, as we were told prior to my video, or barely noticeable at all, as we were told in response to my video. You can't have it both ways. Furthermore, in the case of the latter, if an Earth-orbiting Apollo craft wouldn't have attracted any attention at all, why were we told the exact opposite? Why the sudden switch after reports of such sightings is brought forward to attention? And the very day after the expose too? Over the past few years, it has become clear that when proven wrong, the propagandists will quickly backpedal. For every lie they are caught in, they will slip in another lie to try and maintain a semblance of correctness.
Yeah.